All right, what's up and welcome back for season 3 of the Long Game podcast. Today, we are joined by Brendan Frazier. Brendan, thanks for joining us, man. I've been excited about this and I'm glad that you're starting off this season with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like it's been a long time coming. We've been, interacting, talking, connecting in other forms. But it's good to bring it out here in the public like this and get to talk to both of you guys because I admire the work that you do. I guess you'd call it from afar. Is social media considered afar? I'm not sure, but yeah, I enjoy what you guys do. Look up to it, and I look to it for inspiration. So I think it's cool to get a chance to talk with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, man. It is interesting. We've engaged for a long time. I think it's always funny when we hop on these and you see people for the first time, like different than their profile picture. And you just like never know what you're going to expect. Like the first time I met Trayton, I was like, I have no idea how tall Trayton's going to be. Like, is he going to be skinny? Is he going to be muscular? And he like pulls out in his car. He's like 6'1", he's skinny. And I'm like, that's honestly not at all what I would have guessed he looked like. It's just always hilarious to me.
Yeah. So there's also the other piece to it too. When you have a podcast, if the video element isn't as popular as the audio piece, that when you hear a voice for so long, right, that like you hear the voice, and as you hear in the voice, if you don't have a mental image, right, you start constructing one in your head. And what I've found is that anytime you go meet somebody in person, right, after only hearing their voice, they never look like what you think they're going to look like, So that's the one thing I'm always afraid of, is when I actually meet somebody in person or virtually, if it's in a Zoom or online meeting. I'm always like, all right, this might be a massive disappointment, but there's not a whole lot I can do about it.
That's so funny. Well, hey man, will you give a quick intro to just who you are for the people that don't know?
Yeah. I'll try to make it quick so people don't hit pause or delete and fall asleep, one of the two or one of the three. So I've been in the financial services for the better part of, I was typing this the other day. I can't believe it's been 11 years as of June. My career started doing work alongside advisors, and then got into the financial planning and financial advice side. And then at the same time, like I have this endless fascination and passion for what I call the human side of money, or like the human, emotional, mental, psychological piece that goes along with people and their money. That's kind of just it had always been there, I think, but in 2018, it really started boiling up, and I felt like it was something that I wanted to dive more into, wanted to spend more time on, because I felt I would see it come up in certain areas of my life. And that's what kind of propelled me to work closely with advisors on how to get better at all these things that they don't teach you, that you can't calculate on a spreadsheet, that they don't teach you in trainings and designations. So basically just sort of immerse myself and research books, conversations with smart people that know more about it than I do, to try to learn everything that I can to make it to try to distill it and make it as digestible and applicable and understandable as possible. So you're not just reading some research paper on the psychology. You're not reading an abstract on how the variable was controlled in the research study, but it's like, okay, what do I actually do with this information to improve my life or to improve my clients' lives?
Yeah, I love that. And so that's what we're going to talk about, for all listeners to know today. We're talking the whole side of just like how money and emotions really meet. Because I think if you go to the Twitter world, like, I'll put out a post and you'll have people argue with you that like, oh, X person or every person should do X, Y, and Z. But what they fail to realize is that, like, I guess that's the money side of it. Like, yes, there is a most efficient route. There is a textbook answer of how you should manage your finances, but that doesn't take into consideration at all the human element. And from what I found is the human element actually is the most important part of figuring out how to manage your finances.
Yeah. So and this is really sort of where this whole thing, I think, where the passion and the interest was lit was when I sat there. I was sitting in our house at our living room, and we got this magazine. I forget which publication it was, but it was like 94 pages on like how to get in shape. Basically, it's like that was the gist of it. So it was like 94 pages of workouts and testimonials and eating plans, all that. And I'm sitting there going like, hey, hang on, wait a minute. 94 pages on how to get in shape, when really how to get in shape is not that hard. It's you either have to, you could do two things. You eat less and eat healthier, and then you work out more. right? It's like, hang on, wait a minute. Why do we need 94 pages when really it should be simple? And what that told me was like, we don't have an information problem, right? We don't have any shortage of information on how to do the things that we want to do in life. If you want to know how to do something, the answers, they're all out there and they exist. It's an execution problem is what we have, right? So you think about any area of your life where you have a vision or a goal or an idea of where you want to be. So call it your marriage or your relationship with your partner. If it's not where you want it to be, or it's not as great as you want it to be, it's not because you can't find books, podcasts, articles on how to actually improve your relationship. If your business isn't where you want it to be, it's not like you don't have access to information on books, podcasts, articles, tweets on how to get your business where you want it to be, right? If you're not in the shape that you want to be in, you don't need more information on how to get in great shape. Now, I'm going to throw a disclaimer in there. Information is 100%. It's still necessary. It's still helpful and important. Like we need to know that eating a cheeseburger is not as healthy for you as eating a salad, right? You have to at least know these things at a base level. It's just the information's not sufficient. So there's a stat or study that I found while I was on vacation a few years ago that I think really hammers this point home. That's why I want to share it. And yes, I am like oddly passionate about this, where I read about this stuff on vacation, and I know that's a problem. We'll deal with that another time. But so I don't know a lot about heart bypass surgery. But I know the basics at least. So there's people listening that'll know way more than I do. But at the core, the gist of it is that when you have to have a heart surgery, or when you have to have heart bypass surgery, you have a valve in your heart that's where blood flow is blocked, right? And so obviously blood flow being blocked in the heart's not a good thing. So they go in and they put a stent in your heart to open up the valve so that blood flow can go through, and so that you can live healthy. Now, what we also know about heart bypass surgeries, or what I learned from this article anyways, is that putting in that stent, it's not a cure. It's basically a Band-Aid, right? And it's basically guaranteed to not last as long as you need it to last. So what they tell these patients after they have heart bypass surgery, this expensive, invasive surgery, is they say, hey, we put this stent in. It's not the cure. If you want to get better and not have to have another surgery at some point down the line, another expensive, invasive surgery, or even worse, if you want to try to not have a heart attack and die, you have to actually change parts of your lifestyle, the things that contribute to it. You have to eat healthier, maybe eat less. You have to exercise a little bit more, and you can't smoke. So if you'll do those things, then you'll be better, and you'll reduce your risk of needing another surgery or dying. But if you don't, then you're gonna be back in here for another surgery, or you may have a heart attack and die. So they follow up with these patients 2 years later. Right? So we're talking about it's a matter of life and death. You have the information that you need in order to live longer or to avoid an expensive invasive surgery. 2 years later, 90% of patients hadn't even changed their lifestyle, hadn't altered it in any way. And that was the moment for me where I kind of went, okay, hang on, wait a minute. If there was ever a time, if we were to stack the deck in favor of information and say, hey, okay, that's not true, information can prevail. It definitely can. That would be it, right? It would be like, if it's a matter of life and death, information will be all that you need. And it didn't work that way. And so that's when I became even more fascinated with, okay, well, if it's like that with life and death, then it's definitely like that with our finances as well, with our money as well. You can know the things that you're supposed to do, or that you even really, really, really want to do. But that's just the information piece. It's the execution part, the behavioral side, the psychological side. That's usually the barrier that keeps you from going from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah. I think so now we equate it back to personal finance. Everybody knows that they should spend less than they make. Everybody knows they should try to grow their income. Everybody knows they shouldn't impulse buy and, get cars that are unaffordable. Everybody knows that they shouldn't have credit card debt, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
That could be a whole probably multiple hour conversation in and of itself, right? Each one of those things could be for a different reason, and it could be for a different reason for each individual person. I do know that there's been some research done that says 90% of our spending decisions and money decisions are emotional. Right. And so one of the things that's kind of opened my eyes is, like, I'll give you one example of it. Like, let's say credit card debt as an example, or let's say somebody that's not saving as much as they're supposed to be saving. Or you say, hey, I know I need to be saving this amount of my money so that I can have this savings or so that I can start investing. Or you say, hey, I really shouldn't be spending this money because I'm going to start racking up credit card debt. You know this to be true, but oftentimes what happens is there's something else going on. There's an underlying need or motivation that we just don't realize is happening. So one example that has come up recently that I'm familiar with that I've seen personally is you have let's say, I'm not going to use names obviously, but say you have an individual, a lady who, or a girl who's they grew up with a dad who his way of showing love was to shower her with lavish gifts, right? Like, hey, we're going through a tough family time. I want to make sure you don't bail on me. I'm going to give you these expensive gifts so that I can buy your love and make sure that you still love me and will forgive me for the hard times that our family's going through. So what that does is it creates this self-feedback loop, this mechanism where she starts learning, hey, my worth is based on nice things. My self-worth is based on these nice things. So you fast forward to today, right? What we know is that our money beliefs are generally formed in our childhood from experiences that happen in our childhood, which is crazy to believe for anybody also that has kids, no pressure. But this experience that happened in her childhood is still what's at the bottom or forming her beliefs and her behaviors in today's day and age. So it's not like she doesn't want to start saving money. It's not that she wants to rack up credit card debt, but it's this battle between, I know what I should do, but I've always operated this one way my whole life. And to give up buying nice things, well, it's in order to have more money to save, for example, I need to give up buying all these nice things. And to give up all these nice things isn't just a matter of not buying them anymore. It's a matter of having to shape or change my identity and how I've felt love for my whole life. It's a completely different battle. It's a completely different game altogether.
Yeah, that's that's tough because it's hard to figure out like how you change that really. And I feel like I also understand how like financial advisors can avoid getting into the talk about like what is money to you and how did you grow up with money and all those questions. And I always use this perfect example of, there's all the people who talk about, hey, like, you should not pay off your mortgage quicker. Like, I think this is just such an easy example. They use that one example and say, hey, you have a 3% mortgage. It makes no sense to pay that off. And
right.
For the average person, you're right. But then you have the story of a kid who grew up and at 10 years old, his, dad left. It's him and his mom. Mom can't afford it. House goes into foreclosure and they are basically homeless and they're hopping around different places. And for that person, like what money means to them is they want to use money to have more security in life because they've never felt secure ever in their life. And to her, having a mortgage payment is at any time I could lose my house. At any time that could happen to me, just like it happened when we were a kid. And that's what has scarred me my whole life. So for that person, that might be by far the most optimal decision for them to make is say, hey, I want to pay off this mortgage. It's going to create a sense of security for me. It's going to allow me to not be worried all the time and think that like my life can all of a sudden be drastically changed like it was when I was a kid. But then there's the other person who, hey, I want to pay off my mortgage quicker because my parents told me to. Okay, well, why? Well, because of interest costs. Okay, well, let's just view like if you paid it over 30 years and then if you invested it, what does that look like on a 2.5% mortgage? Oh, actually, it's probably significantly better to just invest those dollars. The reason why your parents told you that is not because they were wrong. It was because when they were a kid, they had 8 to 10% mortgage rates where that is a more costly decision. So like person A who went through that as a child, you can't really change that behavior really because it comes from a huge experience versus person B, they just are doing certain things because of an education problem. It's not something that's rooted deep enough where it's a sense of security or it's a sense of like my life could go into shambles. It's really just my parents said that was right. And I think my parents are right. I haven't looked into why. And they just need the information. And I think that's where finance becomes really hard is there's so many parts of the decisions that are like that. Then you have another person who, my dad, he retired, he started messing around the stock market, lost it all at 65 and had to restart his whole life. Well, I'm probably going to be pretty scared of the stock market because I watched it ruin my parents' life and their whole retirement versus somebody else who's just like, ooh, I can't handle the stock market. I heard it went bad, but has no real emotion behind it. They just need they just need the education around it. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's where it becomes really hard. And you have to get to know people so you can figure out how to help coach them for their best life, different than somebody else who's rooted with different behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, amen. The whole time you were talking, I was just sitting there nodding my head, going, "Yes, yes, yes." That's exactly right. We could probably just stop recording and call it a conversation. But no, yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point. Or like, what's embedded in all that is the fact that a lot of how we act and operate in our operating systems in our minds today are formed based off experiences from your past, right? And so, like, a lot of you can pretty much account anything that you do today is based on a way that you've responded to your past. So, I think your example is a great one, and I've seen you talk a little bit about this online. And I'm a big believer in it too. That you shouldn't be taking advice from your parents. You can be heeding their wisdom, right? You can take their advice as one piece of the wisdom that you want to collect, but you shouldn't be doing what they do, because, like you said, they may have a completely different experience in a different time and in a different era than the experience that you're having in the life that you're living. And so you're playing two entirely different games. You wouldn't want to go play your game with outdated information and outdated knowledge. It hasn't been, it's time to upgrade and reprogram for today's environment and for today's day and age. But yeah, that's a great example of, hey, we grew up at a time where where interest rates were 8 to 10%. And even though they're not there anymore, you've wired yourself to think in a way where, in a world where interest rates are high, right? Like so I think the important thing to do is like to basically try to spend some time understanding what it is that has shaped the person that you are today. This doesn't just go for money, by the way, right? Like, all the decisions that you're making, the mental model that you have on the world is influenced in some way, shape, or form by your past and by your experiences. So it's good to stop and take account of, hey, what are some of the experiences that have happened in my life that have formed who I am today? And the step number one in terms of improving your behavior is being aware of the fact that it exists, right? It's being aware of the fact that, so like and I'll give you an example, a personal example here, but my wife and I, we go, she's a marriage therapist. So we have a therapist that we go to quarterly for these check-ins, right? Just to do some work and make sure we're, not falling, we're not going down the escalator by standing still. We're always working to get better. And so one thing that I had to realize was based on my past is that I don't do well expressing my emotions, right? Like, the world that I grew up in, you didn't express emotions. You just kept powering through, powering on. You put your head down, everything will work out just fine. So that manifests itself in our marriage, so that when I have an issue, I don't bring it up or talk about it. Right. I just put my head down and say everything's going to be fine. Well, then it bubbles up and it blows up and things go haywire. Right. So in order for us to help solve that problem, right? By the way, I knew what to do, right? I knew that, hey, I should probably go talk to her about these things. We should work it out together. But the information didn't help. What was helpful was going, okay, because of the way I was growing up, the way I was raised, I have a tendency to avoid conversations like these because I never saw it happen, because I was told that you should put your head down and you figure things out on your own. So just being aware of it is step one. And then once you're aware of it, you can recognize yourself doing it in the moment, and then start taking agency and start doing things to improve it, or to take action, if you will, to actually change things for the better.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, because I was just going to ask you, like, how do people, like, where do they even start with understanding this? So the start first is like, become aware of what your biases are or what your emotions are, is really step one. So if we kind of equate it to that first example you had, where the girl was showered with gifts, and that was what, like, hey, tough times happen. The thing that makes me feel good is expensive things. So then as an adult, you're wondering, like, why am I overspending all the time? Okay, great. Like, you got anxious, you were feeling a little bit depressed about life, you went and bought a $700 purse, right? And it's not just the money, but it's saying, like, why did you feel like you had to go spend the money? You have multiple purses, you feel good about it, but what you realize is, like, you need that to feel okay. Okay, so I'm aware that when I become insecure or life becomes hard, nice material possessions are what make me feel better. I'm aware. So, but then the next step is, well, how do I overcome this? Is it maybe like finding a different thing that's a little bit less expensive that makes you feel better? Is it, hey, when you start to feel this, how do you deal with that emotion other than some type of fix to solve it? Which I feel like is obviously like the easy answer, and that's easy to tell somebody, but like we all have our problems. We all have fixes that we use to get through life. So I think that's the hard part of like, and especially financial planning, is you can't convince anybody that their behavior is wrong. Like they have to first understand and come to terms with it. And I mean, we can talk about marketing and trying to get clients. Like the whole thing is you can't convince somebody they need a financial advisor. They have to say, here's my problem. I keep going into the same thing, or like, hey, I don't have the time to do this. I need help.
Yeah.
Like that, you have to know your problem and you have to be willing to say, I'm willing to look for a solution to this. Because if you try to tell somebody it's a problem, they don't believe it, nothing's going to happen out of that.
Right. Yeah. That the worst way to try to get a point across is to tell somebody they have a problem or to tell them how to solve a problem. Right. That's we know from research from fields where they have to try to convince people to change their behavior, like hostage negotiators, that the least effective way to get somebody to do something is to tell them what to do. They say it takes 19 times more telling somebody what to do than getting them to convince themselves that it's what they need to do. Right. So that certainly doesn't get the job done. I think one of the more effective things you can do, well, it's really, what do you do about it? It's sort of twofold. So number one is I identify or uncover or name, if you will, what is this need or this thing that money is solving for? What is it doing? What is it solving for? What is the need that it's answering in your life, right? So with the example where you're being showered with gifts, well, I feel like that's how I feel loved. That's how I kind of get my self-worth. That's how I present myself to my friends so that they'll love me, right? So just being aware of it's good, but then knowing that that's the need, you start coming up with, okay, so what are some other ways that I could fill that need that's not like by spending a bunch of money? What are some other ways, like what can I do to make sure that, or to come off as, be a good friend, to be respected, to be well liked, that's not that doesn't require me to go into credit card debt or not start down a savings path. Or and another example that I've heard as far as like uncovering the underlying need is, if you're at work, right, you're at your office, you have this tendency to go to the snack machine every afternoon and you buy the cookies in the snack machine. You're going, I shouldn't be eating these cookies. I don't want the cookies. I want to get in better shape. I need to eat healthy. But you go and you do it every day. What you think is just a cookie problem is actually what your body's craving is some time to get up, get away from work. And it's a place where you go meet and have community with others, right? You're there, you're away from your work and you're talking to friends, you're having conversations. So it's not about the cookies. It's about a mental break and time and community with other people. So what are other ways you can get a mental break and still have time and community with other people? Well, maybe you can walk around the office or go outside and take a walk with somebody and take an apple with you, right? So you identify the need that it's solving and then come up with a healthier, better solution. That's number one. Number two, which I think is probably more powerful, is you've got to find a bigger why. And so the quote that I like is, if you have a big enough why, you'll always figure out the how. And so anybody that's familiar with Simon Sinek and his work around why and the power of why, what you know is that if you can uncover, be familiar with, or get intimate with your why and your purpose and the things that are truly most important to you, if your why is bigger, then that helps solve the problem. So for example, in the example, we'll go back to the girl has a tendency not to save because she spends money on nice things for her worth and identity. So let's say that one of the things that she wants to save for is her kid's education, right? She really wants to be able to put her kids through school. Well, then instead of just saying, hey, next time she goes out and she sees the $2,000 handbag or purse, or if it's a guy, next time he goes out and he sees the $4,000 4K 87-inch TV that he could hang on the wall, right, to show all of his friends, that's tempting. But it's really tempting when you're comparing it to, I probably shouldn't do that because I need to save, right? Just, okay, I guess I should save money. Well, you're pretty much going to lose that 100% of the time. Like that's a battle that you're very rarely going to win. But if you're sitting there and you're looking at the handbag or the 87-inch TV and you're thinking about how bad you want it, but on the other side, your why is the fact that you want to provide and take care of your kids by putting them through college so that when they get out of college, they're not strapped with student loan debt, so that they have the freedom to do something that they love to do. that becomes a completely different lens through which to view the decision. So anytime you can find a competing bigger why, that's also helpful in terms of making this of improving the behavior. So it's not just about the TV versus the generic savings account, right? It's about the handbag or the TV versus the ability to provide a future for my children, and that becomes a different equation altogether.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thought process around with financial planning. It's like everything you're doing has to be tied to a goal or tied to a why. So, like in our second meeting, I spend a ton of time getting to know clients, getting to know, like, what are you trying to accomplish? So they might say, we need to build an emergency fund. We need to get out of debt. We need to invest for retirement. We want to pay for our kids' education, and we got to save for a house. And I say, great. Okay. Like, let's put these in order of importance. Like to you, like for a lot of people, you don't always have enough money to solve all those problems, right?
Right,
And
right.
so what we need to do is we need to make sure they're prioritized for you. So that way, hey, if we can't do all of them, like here, we'll start with one. What does it take to get there? And then what, two, and then there, and then three, then there. And then realize that 4 and 5 aren't accomplishable. So they'll say, hey, great. I've based on cash flow, I think I have $4,000 a month to plan with. Okay, great. So that can accomplish 1 to 3, which is your order of importance, but 4 of kids' education, you're not going to be able to fully fund it right now based on this. And you're not going to be able to retire at 55. It's going to have to be like 62 based on the numbers and what you're able to do. And then you tell them, that's fine. Like whatever you guys want to do, whatever your goals are fine by me. My job is not to tell you what you need to do. My job is to show you how to accomplish the goals that you have. If you want to push those back and keep spending where it's at, by all means do it. That doesn't change anything for anybody else. It's your life. But if you realize that, hey, I looked at cash flow and I could probably cut $1,000 a month from a couple things that don't matter as much because retirement and my kids' education is super important. And then they'll be like, then they're like, you know what? Actually, I could do that. And that is more important to me than, X, Y, and Z that are kind of wants that don't add a whole lot of value for my life. And I think that's what I found is in the beginning and where I was always taught was that like, you just tell people it's the HSA, it's the Roth IRA, term insurance, disability insurance, blah, blah, blah. But then nobody executes. There's the whole statistic in our like 30 to 40% of client recommendations get implemented. And it's because they don't know why they need to do it. If they were tied to, I really have to do $5,000 a year because if I only do $3,000 to my kids, 529, they're going to pay for 75% of the school. And I don't want them to do that because my parents paid for mine and I know what a blessing that was. And I would never want my kids to go through it. Well, they're going to do it because that is that important to them versus, hey, you need to do a 529 for college, just saying something. Hey, here's another account that goes for the future. They don't get it. It doesn't mean anything. So they're not going to change behavior to do those things.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I have 2 thoughts that came to mind, if that's all right, based on what you were saying.
Yeah.
So one is another example personally from my life, from our life, right? Because back to your point around, essentially, unless you have unlimited amounts of money and cash flow, when you're talking about money, you're ultimately at some point you're usually looking at trade-offs, right? Like trade-offs between what you want to do and what you can do, what you can't do, what you want to do, what you're not able to do. In your example, you had items 1 through 5. The extra money you have left over is only enough to fill up 1 through 3. So now it's a conversation around trade-offs of like, okay, is that how we want to do it? Are we okay leaving 4 and 5 out for now? And so what that also assumes is that, well, I guess that doesn't assume that, but what that also hints at is that one of the most important things you can do is spend time getting really clear and convicted about what it is that is most important to you in your life. Because once you do that, you now have a lens through which to evaluate these trade-off decisions. Roy Disney says that when your values are clear, your decisions are easy. So here's an example from my life, for our personal life, right? So a couple of years ago, we were having a second kid. We needed to move because we only had 2 bedrooms. Our first son was in that bedroom. We were going to have another one. So we're basically just going to be like, on top of each other if we didn't get us a little bit bigger house. So we're in Nashville. Housing market here is like outrageous, which, everybody thinks, oh, I'm going to throw this as a side note in there. Everybody's like, oh man, this is so great. The housing prices are going up. Our house that we live in is appreciating in value. Look at how much more it's worth now than when we bought it for. And it's always like, yeah, that's good. It's better than not growing, right? But like, are you going to move? Are you going to sell it?
And
and
rent.
move and rent or sell it and move to a completely different city, because otherwise you're buying back into the same market, right? So you would obviously rather have your house go up than go down, but it's not this like great thing that everybody thinks it is. I don't think. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic for another podcast. So anyways, we're in Nashville and we're having to evaluate like, man, okay, what do we want to do? What do we think's important? So we had a house that, and let me say this first. So for my wife and I, we've spent time, we know that being close to and spending time with family now, especially now that we have kids, is of utmost importance. That's probably like our number one thing that we want to like prioritize. And we think, hey, everything is about like spending time with family. Fortunately, I like my in-laws, so that works out well. And so they live in Nashville too. So there was one house that was available it's about 6 minutes down the street from their house. There's a second house that we were looking at that was like 20 minutes away. And the house that we were looking at that was closer was like $50,000 more, right? And so when we look at it, we're looking at the implications of that. It's like, okay, if we do that, it's going to mean we may not be able to save as much for long-term investing. It means that we may not be able to have as much discretionary cash flow week in and week out to go out to eat or do a couple of these other things that we like to do, right? Like we may not be able to go to as many concerts, for example, but what we know is that number one on our list of things that are most important to us in our lives, the lens through which we evaluate this is spending time with family and in community with family, is the number one thing that we want to do. We want to invest our time, money, and energy in. So it made sense to us. It was clear to us that that's a decision we wouldn't regret. If we had moved away 20 minutes away and didn't see them as often as we did 6 minutes down the road, would being able to go to a few more concerts per year compensate for that? Would it make it worthwhile? To us, the answer is no. So we were okay making this decision because we were clear on what was important to us.
Yeah. I think that's important. And I also think because you're a financial advisor, because you're into the psychology side, you know those well. What I've found is that most people don't know them well. And a lot of times what they say is the most important to them actually ends up not being the most important to them. And so like in this example that you just had, there's a lot of times where people will say the same thing as you, and then they'll come to that decision of like, which would I rather have? And they'll pick the other house. And then they'll realize it's like, maybe I've been saying the values I think should be the top, but I'm realizing for me, those aren't actually the top values. I would rather have some extra discretionary income. Maybe it lets us go on another vacation a year. And I actually really prioritize vacation because that's what I'll get that list from 5 people and I'll show them what it takes. And I'll be like, oh, number one for me was paying off my student loans in 2 years. And now that I realize that if I do that, it'll take 4 years to buy a house. Actually, those flipped. We really do want to buy a house and we'll pay $4,000 of extra interest over the next 2 years to get us into a house quicker. So that's what I think the values exercise is super important, but not taking people for sure with what they say and digging deeper and trying to refine and show what it takes. So then they can realize for themselves, like, maybe a lot of the goals and the values that I have are things that, I haven't really thought about too much and I'm just saying. And now what I realize what I have to give up, it's not actually my top value and this is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, 2 things there. One is, yes, you have to do the work to truly uncover what it is that's actually most important to you instead of just saying what comes to mind. So our 3-year-old's the perfect example of how the brain works, right? Like we'll go to dinner one night. So like say last night we went to dinner and he had a cheeseburger. Fast forward 24 hours later, about to eat, and we say, hey, Brooksy dude, what do you want for dinner tonight? Cheeseburger, because that's the last thing that he had for dinner. And so he doesn't really want a cheeseburger. It's just the first thing that comes to his mind, right? So like in order to guard and protect against that, you have to spend intentional time in the space of truly working through the process to figure out what it is that's actually most important to you. And then because doing that then provides the lens that I was talking about earlier. But here's the other thing that we know from some of the psychology research. There's this thing called the end of history illusion. And I think it's Daniel Gilbert. You can watch a YouTube video on it. And what we know about people is that we tend to see, if you ask somebody, hey, what was your life like 10 years ago? And you have them walk you back and tell you how old they were and the things that they were doing, and then walk you on this journey to where they are today. They talk about how much different they are now, how the different ways that they've changed, all the different ways that they've grown, how their preferences and goals have shifted. And then you say, hey, now that we're here today, take me 10 years into the future. What is that going to look like? And people tend to think that they're going to look exactly like they do today in 10 years. It's just this natural thing that we do. It's really hard to comprehend how much you're going to change over a 10-year period. But we know that over a 10-year period, personalities change, goals change, preferences change. But the most stable of all those things are what you would call value or your why. So what I always say is that goals are what shift, but values tend to persist. It's not bulletproof. It's not ironclad. Some people's values will change, right? If you value family and then you have a family member that hurts you or they pass away, right? That's going to shift. But typically speaking, your values persist, but your goals shift. So in your example, in financial planning context, or just a money example, paying off student debt, buying a house, those are goals. Those aren't values. So yes, those things are going to shift. If you can uncover your values or the things that are truly deeply held values, things that are truly most important to you, those are the things that persist for a longer period of time. Those are the things that you want to try to plan your money and your future and your finances around because they're more stable.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're probably coming up on time, so maybe like a couple more questions. One thing that, I mean, what's the biggest piece of advice you give to people of like how to figure out and how to intersect this like whole psychology component or behavioral component with their own finances?
Yeah, this is going to be kind of ironic, by the way, because at the very beginning, we talked about how information isn't like the answer, right? It's not an information problem. But for a disclaimer, I did say that information is still necessary. So my first response to that is to say a lot of times information forms the foundation. So if you're looking to sort of like get into this or branch into, which by the way, we know that that behavior and psychology accounts for a large portion of financial success. So I would say everybody needs to at least be aware of it or be into it or have an advisor or planner that is aware of it. I would say the base of where you want to start is probably with opening up your mind to the ways in which your psychology and your behavior influences your money and your finances. And so there's two people and two books that I would highly recommend. Yeah. So I will go with books, but also there are people that are active on social media and write and have businesses around this stuff. One of them's Morgan Housel, who you guys know. He wrote the book, The Psychology of Money. Yeah, it's right back there. It's a staple. I've read it 3 times. It's a little weird, I know. But it's first of all, the info is good, but the way he writes is awesome. The second one, do you guys know Ramit Sethi?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a really good podcast.
Yeah, great
with
podcast.
Couples. Like I try to recommend it to a lot of couples to sit down and listen because he has like hey, here's a couple, you guys have money problems. You're completely different. Let's facilitate this conversation because you have to actually sit and talk through these money things that most couples don't talk about. Like I would really highly recommend that podcast for couples for sure.
Yeah, same here. No doubt. The one that sticks out in my mind the most recent one I listened to is a couple that had, they have an $8 million net worth. And the husband was still comparison shopping strawberries at the grocery store, like trying to not buy the strawberries for $9.99, but he would like go and comparison shop at all the different grocery stores to find the one that was $7.99. Yeah. Right? And so like the whole point, and the reason I like the podcast is he walks them through and this exercise of understanding like what's really going on there. Instead of telling him like, hey dude, you've got $8 million, you can buy whatever strawberries you want, because we know that telling somebody is the least effective way to communicate a message. He walks them through a conversation with questions, guided questions to help him uncover what's going on there and why that's the case and what it could look like to do it different. So yeah, that podcast is awesome. And then, he's got a business where he talks about psychology and finance. And then his book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. I think it has the second version out now. It does a great job of helping you like get your infrastructure, your base in place when it comes to you're managing your money and automating your finances and those sorts of things. Now he has blocked me on Twitter, so I can't believe I'm still praising him, but I've called him out for some of his views on his views on financial advice don't mesh with the rest of his views in his life. And I think it makes him uncomfortable. So he eventually blocked me and hasn't forgiven me yet, but I have to mention him because I think he's somebody that's been influential in developing my insights and awareness around this space, and would highly recommend it to him to anybody else looking to learn more, do the same.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, Brennan, thank you so much for coming on and starting the season with us. We really appreciate you kind of sharing your knowledge. And this was a topic that we really know is important, but we hadn't quite talked about yet. So thanks for giving us some time, and let everybody know where they can follow you, because you have some great content. Also, people don't know you're a top 100 advisor. Hopefully people are happy they get to listen to three of us talk
Yeah, yeah, that's
for
right.
40 minutes. But yeah, just share where people can find you.
Yeah, so my the website where I post all my content for the podcast and stuff is wiredplanning.com. That's mainly for advisors, it's advisor and planner facing or content, but I put a lot of content out on LinkedIn and on Twitter as well. So you can find me on there, or you can go to the website, check me out there. But yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on. I like I've said at the beginning, I'll say it again. I think you guys are doing great work, some of the best work out there. Love what you do, and it was an honor to be on here.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Thanks everybody for listening and starting the season with us. We'll see you back next week.